disaster coming at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master coming at ya, at ya. Rhyme style disaster coming at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master coming at ya.
And with that beat, hello and welcome to In Focus. I am Rom Gayoso, your host. So this is our inaugural show, and the topic of today, well, you guessed it, it is the future. We are welcoming Dr. Erik Øverland, President of the World Future Studies Federation, or WFSF, the premier futurist organization in the world. So I've been waiting quite some time to interview Dr. Øverland, and today is special. For going forward, we'll be working together to disseminate knowledge of future studies. We're both passionate about the future, so this is going to be a very fun talk. Well, let's get going. So before we get started, let's go over the show in focus and why we are here. All righty. So the show is a result of a partnership between WFSF and yours truly, Futures Television. We're joining forces to advance sharing of information and knowledge of futures topics. Our focus is on future studies, foresight, and futures literacy. So what should you expect? Well, you'll gain direct access to knowledge and information produced by the top minds in this field. WFSF is a UNESCO and United Nations consultative partner and a truly global NGO with members in over 60 countries. So, we'll go on a world tour to meet academics, researchers, practitioners, students, and a variety of think tanks and futures-focused institutions. What should you expect to gain from this show? Well, number one, great insight from people whose day job is to mull over a great variety of possibilities. And that is important because it will help us better manage uncertainty and, to the extent possible, minimize surprises. Two, you get unfiltered access to those thinkers. And three, you'll find out firsthand the latest advances in the field. So before I welcome our guest, well, don't be shy. The chat windows are open, so feel free to say hi. So let me say a few words about Dr. Øverland. So Erik is a guest researcher at Institut Futur in Freie Universität Berlin, Free University of Berlin in Germany, and a policy advisor to the Ministry of Education and Research in Norway. He has a background as a guest lecturer at the University of Stavanger on foresight management issues and a keynote speaker on conferences both in Norway and abroad. He is one of the co-founders and co-editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Futures Research, or EJFR. So without further ado, why don't we welcome Dr. Øverland? How are you doing today?
Hi, Rom. Thank you. I'm fine. I'm very happy to be here and very happy about our cooperation. I mean, it's looking very, very forward to this series and very excited about the whole undertaking here. So, yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, a lot of people are saying hi to you. Tom Lombardo here in the US, Dr. Klaus Soilin, Chuck Metz, Kai Gerlich in Germany. So a lot of people are saying hi to you. And
then I say a hi back. Hello, everyone.
Thank you so much for being here. Well, I hope I did not do too bad of a job at the introduction, but please, if I miss anything truly important, could you say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, Ram. I mean, you mentioned already the most interesting thing, also at least regarding the futures field. But I came into this field for approximately now 25 years ago. I was appointed as a managing director of a huge government-relating foresight program called Norway 2030. And we had a lot of interesting methodological discussions, and also was able to establish these projects as an international project. So at some point, this project was more known internationally than in Norway. So that's a big part of my life and a big part of my identity. When that is said, I also work for the ministry and also very concerned about policy foresight, the relation between government structures and long-term thinking as future research and future studies. I could say a lot more about myself, but okay, indirectly we can go back to that.
That's perfect. So let's talk a little bit about WFSF. So long term, big picture, radical change. That is an ambitious vision, by the way. So what are your thoughts on WFSF?
Yeah, WFSF was established back in 1973 in Paris. That means we're going to have a 50 years anniversary next year. And it was established at that time. And I have to say something about that time, because back in 1967, it was a conference by some very engaged scholars around the world. We're gathering in a conference in Oslo, which was called Mankind 2000, in which they tried to address the future in a different way. And they also had some pioneering ideas about system thinking that wasn't necessarily a part of the conventional academic approach at that time. So they decided, so they spent probably 2 or 3 years to be able to establish a formal organization called the WFSF, as a World Future Studies Federation. And if you look at the early days of the federation, you see that they were very engaged in the question about sustainability and climate change and things like that in a very, very early stage. And if you look at one of our pioneer ladies, Eleonora Mazzini, she was a professor at the university in Rome at that time, and she organized a lot of activities, conferences and workshops and so on and so forth, which, by the way, also have contributed to the establishment of the limits of growth and study and the activities around new sustainability thinking at that time. So I think the WSF as a kind of organization which was academic oriented in the beginning, but also very oriented toward change. So in many ways, the long-term, big picture, radical change reflect the so-called Greek triangle that you reflect on, you discuss, and you want to make some interventions about. You want to create futures also. So I think you have all those dimensions within the federation. And since then, we have members in 60 countries all over the world, and contemporary today, the federation is in a very, very, upcoming, very good phase in a sense that we have a lot of activities. I won't go into all the kind of activities. We can go back to that later in our talk, but for example, accreditation, acknowledgement, stimulation to think long-term future towards political administrative systems, and also within corporates and all kind of levels. It's it's a very manifold and heterogeneous activities covered by the members of the federation.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to kind of highlight, folks, in today's world, we face propaganda wars, and I cannot stress enough the value of independent organizations such as the WFSF. So independence is important. So you bring a perspective that's independent, so not tainted, one way or another. Now, I wanted to ask you about one of your quotes, and you said, and I will quote, futures reasoning is not about getting it right at the end, but about the courage of being wrong in interesting ways. So could you please explain your thoughts? What were you thinking?
Yeah, that's actually that's a quote. I've translated it as originally a thing that I presented in the book about it, this Norway 2030 project at the time, and I also been quoted a lot of time in the Norwegian context, actually, about that. And the reason why I think that quote is important is that it is somehow a critical approach to so-called forecasting. I mean, we are doing futures research, foresight, and future studies, which is something different than try to make prediction and try to elaborate on the most probable futures. So it's that's the reason why it's not about getting it right at the end. I mean, if you create a lot of scenarios, all these scenarios cannot happen at the end. So the main criteria for good foresight exercises is that you have been able to create a lot of fantasy, and you have been, put yourself, challenge yourself in the discussions, that you actually been able to try to launch some new ideas and new kind of thinking. I mean, that's a very, very tall order, but it's an ambition. So that's the reason why you can't measure future thinking, what we are doing, with to have been right at the end. So, but you can point at some very interesting development, of course, that could contribute to more conscious orientation, and that you are conscious about things that going on in the present. But in 50 years of time or 30 years of time, it's not the point that you should sit down there and said, okay, look what I said in 2000. So now it's almost 2030. So I was right. I think that's not the point.
Yeah, certainly not. And I guess we can blame Nostradamus for that. People can always say he said this or he said that. Yeah, but I think it's...
and that's several hundred years ago. So and then you can say everything, we'll always be right.
You always be right if you say, like, in convoluted ways that people don't understand. Oh, no, that's what he meant by this. That's what he meant by that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so changing subjects a little bit. So one of your goals is to promote futures literacy. So why? How can the world at large benefit from more futures thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it's just to say a few things about the term futures literacy, because I think as a future literacy is a kind of describes a competence that you achieve when you are doing certain things. So it's not, in my opinion, future literacy is not a method or not a quick fix solution towards the future, but it's a question about that. If you are orient yourself using systematically some methods and foresight methodology and processes, that you are able to think more consequently and more systematically about the future, which makes the expectation of the future images more reliable. Not reliable, but it makes it more interesting and more creative, and makes you able to be prepared for future development in a better way. So I mean, everyone are living existentially in all kind of temporal parts. I mean, dimensions. I mean, every one of you and every one of us has to deal with the future, has to deal with the past and the present. So every one of us are thinking about the future, but it's a question about to be future literate. Like Real Miller is talking about it, you have to make an achievement, so to say, and you have to be more, well, you can say more professional about orientation towards the future, and but it's also a very, very tall order in the sense that what is it really possible? I mean, if you look at being literate, if you learn to read and write, for example, before you start the process, you cannot read and write, and then you're getting from illiterate to literate, and you start, okay, now I crash the code. I found out about it. I can read. I understand it, and I can also write it. So then you can show that you write. But can you say that about the future in the same sense? I'm not sure about that, but you can at least try to. You have to have the ambition of relating to the future in a more systematic and more appropriate way, and as just being, accidentally creating some ideas about what the future. You have to think more systematically about it, and that's, I think, is a competence that you achieve when you are going into foresight activities and do futures research. So I mean, yeah. So that's the reason why also you need a thorough review and re-review of methods, and you also need some kind of studies to find out, does it work or not work. I mean, if it's aimed at also social change, for example, you really have to think the whole value chain between reflecting and discussing the future to change activities, and that you actually are able to create something new in your engagement. And all those three dimensions belongs to a kind of future literacy, in my opinion, that you are able to both reflect about the future, to discuss it with others, and also create the kind of change and modify the present in turning to a future that you think is better than the future or the present that you got today. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of stress this point in terms of methodology and robustness. So, we're not just going on a whim here. Actually, there's features literacy, there's schools of thoughts, there's methodology. And the more we get familiarized with methodology, I think the, more robust our approach will be. So I think that's one of the advantages of WFSF is exactly that, helping us. So the researchers with new ideas and new thoughts, new approaches, new methodologies, and all that sharing that takes place either through the journal or the magazine or the conferences. So I think this is one of the beauties of WFSF. So I wanted to change gears a little bit and talk about the conference, the Berlin conference last year. So you guys chose to put a lot of emphasis on openness. So what is the value of openness and, to that matter, of inclusion in futures work?
Yeah, the reason why we adopted the term openness is that we got the feeling that we are living in a world in which a lot of people that are also politically oriented are very busy about closing down things, and a lot of you see in social media is an algorithm stimulating positioning, that you position yourself against something others, and you have all those issues about echo chambers in the social media, for example, and also in different other contexts. So we see that that's a danger. I mean, because you need to find ways to move out of such chambers, and you need to move out of if you have a tunnel orientation, or lock in as the other term you can use for it. So I think the methodology within the futures field are helping you to challenge yourself, that you're not staying inside such echo chambers and so narrowing minded orientation. So so that's the reason why we said that this openness of future. So if you address the future according to some criteria, you are really able to open up things, because then you have to say, I mean, the future hasn't happened yet, so you should acknowledge the idea that the future have, eternal possibilities, and you should be able to freely investigate some of those abilities. And that's, the main point of departure for the conference. And we invited, if you look at all the topics that we addressed, which was a long range of different kind of topics. So, but the openness and the idea of open up things was some kind of a red track through all those topics.
Yeah, so it's important to note here, it's not just, we're just talking about openness in the conference. Not really. So all the members that I had the opportunity to talk to had the same thoughts and the same perspective. I had a long conversation with Stefan Bergheim and Alicia Baena, and we're talking about the importance of inclusiveness, and so bringing voices that are not heard, or they were either written off in purpose, or they were, they're not part of the conversation. And they're all emphasizing, why we need to listen to those voices and bring them to the debate. So that's one of the reasons why I felt so much commonality, in amongst all the work we do, is because of your focus on openness and inclusiveness, which is something that I really advocate, throughout the work I do. So I said, this is beautiful, because the future cannot be the future for just one. It's the future for all of us. So we have to have all those voices.
I mean, all the possible surprises in your life is lying in this openness, to acknowledge and to try to stimulate yourself following the idea of an openness in its sense. So no, I also personally, I experienced the same myself. I mean, because I think earlier, should I do that or do that and do that, and then I started to study philosophy and all that kind of things, and which really also is a good way to open up things in your mind, so to say. And I think the future methodology have also helped me personally to open up and to try to think in new terms, and not being, stacked in some. But when that is said, I mean, to be open is it's a process, and you never achieve a total openness anyways. But you can.
It's a learning process.
It's the ambition of being open. I mean, that's the most important thing. Yeah.
I think so. When we acknowledge that perhaps we're not that much open, then we have to work a little bit harder on that. Oh, that's a big step, but at least we're working towards it.
Exactly.
Okay, so I want to go back to the very beginning, and at the introduction, you mentioned Norway 2030. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. So when we think about the future, it's not just some kind of an esoteric perspective. We're not just, tomorrow what's going to happen or years from now, but that it is really used to aid, policymakers in creating and refining their views of the future. And you led Norway 2030, that entire effort. And I'm really curious to hear, so what your biggest challenge really was, and it couldn't possibly be easy to have so many different stakeholders and different points of view. So how did you manage?
That's a very, very interesting question, Rob. But, well, I can try to answer it, because at that time, that was, more than 20 years ago, approximately 20 years ago. And at that time, you have to also consider the Norwegian context, because in Norway, and in particular within the political administrative system, you have mainly done futures thinking through social economic modeling exercises, in the sense that making forecasts. That is the main approach of doing future thinking within the political administrative system. And that was advocated by the Ministry of Finance. And at that time, it was a change in government in Norway, in which it was a new social democratic government with the Prime Minister Robin Jagland, and they want to somehow reform the whole planning institute within the ministerial setting. And then the idea was that to think towards the future, you can't use linear methodology. You can't use only foresight. Now, if I forecast, you have to think in other to use other kind of methodology. So it's a great and a huge opportunity. And at that time, I wasn't that familiar with the foresight and future studies tradition either. So we were a group who was sitting down and trying to find out how should we deal with that challenge, because it was a challenge, because it was never done in that respect before. So I was cooperating very closely to a unit called Cellule de Prospective for Forward Studies unit at the European Union, which made scenario methodology in different kind of ways. So I adopted and learned a lot from them. And also there was the International Futures Program at that time. We learned a lot from, and we were gathering a lot of interesting perspectives on how to do futures at that time, and tried to did quite a good job, I think, to review different approaches. And when that was done, we had to organize a such process in Norway, and we invited all the ministries, and all the ministries accepted beside of one ministry, and that was the Ministry of Finance. And then they told, well, our methods are so good, so we are doing this scientifically, and you are just doing the very just different kind of accidental perspective that you are following. So we don't want to be a part of it. But from 18 ministries, 70 ministries was a part of this. So we organized for over the period of 2 years with mainly public servants within the ministries. And it was, I think at that time, it wasn't done by many countries in such comprehensive way. And we want to demonstrate scenario methodology, between other things, as a part of policy foresight, policy strategic development exercises. And the main challenge, I think, was to get acknowledged and to get accepted that we created an arena within the ministerial setting in which you could think relatively freely, also regarding to the political program that was formulated by the current government. And that's the reason why we had a very, very thorough communication on the highest level, also within on the Secretary of States within the different ministries. And also the Prime Minister was, explicitly behind this. So that was a very, very interesting exercise in that sense, that it was so anchored, so high up on the political level. So we had some quite interesting discussion among the scholars, like among the public servants at that time. And we also wrote a book and had a lot of talks all over the place in Norway and abroad and everywhere about the project. So I think that was very successful in a sense. Also was benchmarked quite well internationally afterwards. But one big issue which I see that is still not solved, is the relation between this brainstorming exercise that foresight future studies in fact is, to how do you come from this heterogeneity of perspectives to a solid and sustainable recommendation towards the political towards political decisions making. So that is still a way to go there, in my opinion, because I, as a public servant, I can't come to my minister and said, "Hey, minister, I got 5 scenarios here, so please choose one of them." You can't do it like that. So you have to, and that's the reason why we were very, very concerned about to define what we are doing when in the process. So we defined the scenario, the loud thinking, the brainstorming exercise, and got that accepted as a part of the process. And then we had to go into another mode, and the discussion about possible priorities and possible political decisions are very, very different in the logic of the dialogue itself. So we were very, very explicit about those differences, and I think that was very useful. But it's still a long way, and the whole system, they didn't have many experiences about this kind of work, this kind of way of working. But now I sense a big change at the time being in Norway, but not only Norway, but also a lot of other countries at that time. So the biggest challenge was actually that to get acknowledged, and get it to the politicians and to get it,
I'm glad you shared your perspective in how you got started and the challenges. On my own journey, it was somewhat similar, but I was in manufacturing, so in the private sector. And my background is in econometrics, so modeling, forecasting. And the most accurate models, have statistical variables in there. And I talked to the managers, and they said, well, the inverse of the square root of the trend. What do you mean by that? And then I realized, well, this is the most accurate model, but actually they wanted to see the models with business variables in there. Oh, the GDP this, consumer confidence that, and blah, blah, blah. And then they asked me, so what about, other developments? And then I realized I have to build a narrative around that. And that allowed for a whole gamut of different questions and explorations, and that was how I got to scenario planning and into foresight. But so I came from
it's interesting.
from the same perspective of, no, we really have to do the statistical models, right? And then I realized, no, they don't want to hear that. No, they don't care about the square root of the inverse of the trend. But if you talk to them in business terms and build a narrative around it, then we can really have real discussions. And so the strategy folks really embrace that kind of thought. Say, well, that's what we want. We don't want econometric models. We want business models, right?
But Ron, we did a very tricky and very interesting thing in which we in those different narratives, those different scenarios that we developed, we created a person in 2030 which made scenarios, or we said it now. No, not scenarios, but we made social economists who made a forecast. So in some scenarios he was right, and in some other scenarios he was totally wrong. So we created forecast exercise as a part of a scenario, so to say. So could demonstrate that forecasts are often wrong, but they can also be right, so it's not necessarily that this is the best way to do it. So we demonstrated forecast activities as part of a scenario in the content, and that was
So I think the real value is, so of course, you can't be right all the time, and you won't be wrong all the time either. But I think the important value is the thought process, and we start thinking in a more structured way about the future. So those are possibilities. And when we are aware of possibilities, we actually can manage uncertainty a little bit better, can't we?
Yes, I mean, it's all about uncertainties. I mean, the point of departure is that you acknowledge that you have certain uncertainties that you can't avoid. You have to be explicit about the uncertainties. You see, if you see the basic logic between forecasting logic and foresight logic, is that you acknowledge the uncertainties and you say, in creating the images of the future, if you think it's unlikely and it's a bit surprisingly, in the foresight project, you are stimulated to go further with it. You have to further following those ideas, although you might in the beginning find it very unlikely that these kind of things going to happen. But in the forecast methodological approach, you want to identify the most likely thing in a very early stage of the analysis, and that's a very, very big difference. So to identify interesting uncertainties and be able to deal with them in an appropriate way, that's the art of foresight and future studies.
Yeah, so we're joined in the call today by some wonderful futurists, and so people like Gerd Leonhard, who is on listening to us.
Yeah.
So he helps us deal with uncertainty. And Tom Lombardo helps us think about using those sci-fi methods to think about how we're gonna envision those futures. So we have Kai Gerlich, we have several wonderful people here on the call with us who actually are experts at uncertainty management.
Well, I know the work of almost every one of those people you mentioned, so I can't agree more.
Well, that's why you're here. I invited you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to a little bit of methodology. So one of the reasons why I bring people is to understand thought processes and the robustness around them. And so the more we talk more, about techniques and methodologies, the better we are. So talking a little bit about theory. So in your work, you talk quite a lot about constructivism. So why is that important? So why do you think we should embrace a constructivism approach?
Yeah, that's well, the term constructivism I've been dealing with since I read philosophy. As I have I've been involved in reading above all transcendental philosophy in the old German tradition mainly, but also toward the French tradition with Bruno Latour as a very, very stimulating thinker to me, and but also Immanuel Kant in the transcendental philosophy, and if you talk about constructivism, I mean, it's a lot of ways to talk about this but related to the futures field, I mean, if you are engaging in foresight activities, you are really constructing things, because you have to construct things if you when you're talking about situation that hasn't happened yet. So we are constructing future scenarios of future images and whatever, and you construct things then. The question is, in my opinion, that you have to advance the idea of constructivism also toward the present and the past also. And if you do that, and that's what I think Bruno Latour is doing, and also my interpretation of the constructivist approach of Immanuel Kant is also similar, in the sense that you are creating expectation towards the nature, for example, that the nature is reconstructed and reproduced as something that you are trying to find the truth about. So you're establishing a subject for your investigation very systematically, and you're reproducing that. And that's a constructivist activity. So when that is said, what has that to do with future thinking? I think it's has everything to do with future thinking. Also, that's the social constructs of natural phenomena, if you can use that term, that you're creating and reproducing the expectation of a nature that is giving to you, that you want to investigate and want to try to find out the truth about. Then you also, through doing that, you reproduce an expectation that was a part of your past and present also, in which you have a systematic expectation that you have actually research objects that you are researching, and that's the nature, and that is also related to expectation in other fields, that you actually are expected that the future also are you have you perceive you have a concept of nature that you are expecting, which you have today, and that also means that if you call it that the construction, it's also a possibility that expectation of that nature in that similar way is going to fall, is going to not be there anymore. So, and it's a very tricky philosophical question, but I think that you have to be aware of what you are constructing. If you see that we need more technology development, we need more growth, we need more natural science and the physical science and so on. So that might appear for you as a given and not something that might vanish in one way or another. I think that's at least my main learning from my philosophical studies time, and to see that if you treat the rose as a moral entity, you see, if you get blooded, you have the dawn on the rose, and you start bleeding, touching it, you won't moralize towards that rose, but you take your gloves on your hand to avoid it next time. And that's the kind of relation between myself and the outer materiality, or the rose and treating the rose as a biological or a botanical entity, so to say. And that's a part of the nature. I think that we have to be very, very aware of, when we are doing future research, that these are constructivist ideas that we have to follow and be aware of when we are also constructing the future.
And one of the beauties is not just the constructivism, so people understand we're not trying to, people sitting in the ivory tower trying to tell you what to do, but rather because of the openness and the inclusiveness, we are co-constructing it together. So we as a community, right, we are working together and we're building our shared future. So it's very different from what people are accustomed to, which is somebody else tells you this is the future, right? This is not what we're doing here.
No. I mean, it's also, if you say, I don't know if you know Thomas Kuhn, for example, and say the paradigm change, and also the Heisenberg's uncertainty theorem, in which one researcher said that the materiality is waves mainly, and the other is a particles. They disagree, but they disagree about the same thing, because they have constructed expectation of a nature that are in the bottom line of those discussions. So both are discussing on behalf of an expectation that the nature gonna be the same, namely a subject for our investigations further, and to find it as waves or particles or maybe something third dimensional, and I think that's very, very interesting, because then you see that the concept of nature as such, like Kant say, das Ding an sich, is a human construct historically, and then we are talking, if we're following that idea.
Yeah, that's the idea, right? The more we talk about it, the better we get at it.
Then we can go into science fiction and the work that Tom Lombardo are doing, see, and how are we supposed to, if we are approaching appearances that looks like ourselves, but it's a machine actually, but it looks, and it's a robot or avatar or whatever, which are look very, very much like yourself. we have to find ways to be aware that immediately that this is a machine and this is not a human being. And I think and the one is nature or materiality, and the other one is something the same as myself.
Of a different essence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about one other of your passions. So you are the co-editor of the European Journal of Futures Research, right? So what do we learn when we read the journal?
Well, the journal, I just have to say something about the background, because it was established in 2012, I think. It was an initiative from Gerhard Johan at the Free University in Berlin, myself and Reinhold Popp and a couple of others in Germany. And we want to start a journal that also adopted some of the contributions that were within the German-speaking area, because I think if you look at what the Germans said, Zukunftsforschung, there's a lot of very, very interesting contributions, but they are not necessarily communicated because they're written in German language, not necessarily written in English and communicated in the bigger community. So we want to establish English-speaking journal based on 2-3 German-speaking German universities. And also the name, I think, is very important to consider, because that's reflecting the term Zukunftsforschung. So in Germany, you put research to the term future, and that's the reason why we call it the European Journal of Futures Research and not future studies or future foresight or whatever. So because we want to relate it to research activities in particular. So there's a lot of contributions. I mean, the topics you see is, if you go into the online page of the journal, which is an open access journal, you see a broad range of topics and thematics that are being addressed there. And I mean, I won't go in details, but there are, published so more than 120 articles the last years on a lot of different topics. Yes.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the last one. So the last edition, the last issue. So I kind of like on that issue, Jan Carlsen's article. So Futures Literacy in the Loop. And he said, the future is open, but not empty. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, when you... I just tried to find out where he wrote that. And I reread the article. And I think, because Jan Carlsen also talks about the Greek triangle, in the sense that you discuss, and you reflect on the future, you discuss on the future, and you want to change the future, want to create the future in many ways. So if you look, it's open, but it's always in content. I mean, you have to concretize. All kind of future images have a concrete content, in a sense, so it's never easy. And if I'm going to take it a bit longer, if you look at the transition between Descartes and Immanuel Kant, for example, as Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, but Kant would say, I think something, therefore I am. You think nature, you think materiality creates and construct. You think always a certain kind of content, and that's the reason why I'm a human being, because I think about something that is not human beings, but it's nature, it's materiality, and so on and so forth. That's a more principal interpretation of that quote, but as far as I can interpret Jan Erik Carlsen here, he's saying something similar, that you always have to think content when you are thinking futures, and also also that you are in one way or another embedded in the political, and not necessarily in a narrow sense, but you are in a mode towards changing things, ambition of changing things, and I think that's an important awareness to have.
It is indeed. So I wanted to go back to more of a philosophical question. So we have Dr. Solberg here. So future studies can never tell you about the future, which is no big surprise. But isn't then the very study contradiction in science from a methodological perspective?
But isn't then the very study contradiction? Well, it depends on because if you have a conventional empirical criteria of what is reality and what is knowledge, I think then it might appear as a contradiction in terms, because is it possible to do research on things that hasn't happened yet? I mean, that sounds very, very strange.
It's esoteric.
Yes, that sounds very strange. So it might appear as a contradiction in terms, but on the other side, I mean, even natural sciences, they make hypotheses. You always have ideas about the future. So and even historians have, when they do, for example, contrafactual history analysis, they create quasi-historical scenarios in which has happened. I mean, it's a construct, but they are prognosing it, projecting it into the history, to try to find out other aspect of that reality that was then. And so you can think also about the present. I mean, if you create future scenarios, you get new kind of aspects of and awareness of things that also are in your present. So that's the reason why I'm saying, why shouldn't you have the ambition of being more systematically towards the future image production, when you are that on to finding out what is now and what have been before. So it's exactly to try to make all those three temporalities on the same level, that they need some more rigor, systematic orientations in all those three temporalities.
And hopefully in the process, we learn from the past, we learn from the present, and hopefully our future is going to be a little bit better.
Yeah, hopefully.
We're still struggling again. Oh yes, he actually had an additional comment. So I mean, it would be like a management discipline that could never tell you how to do management. I don't think so. I don't think you're telling us how to do the management, but rather I think it's a systematic approach, a systematic thinking, right, about the future. So
you need some.
Now, I really can't let you go without asking at least this question. So, what is the value of WFSF membership? What is it you define? So, this is the value of belonging.
Yeah, I think the main value, and I also talk about me personally, is that you get into a network of people who are dedicated to a very uncertain field, in the sense, and they dare to relate to that uncertain field. And we got some, arenas. We got some listservs and other arenas in which the members, are raising different kind of discussion points, so you can engage with very, very thorough and very, very interesting people, and raise questions that you are dealing with in your own research or your own working activities, and so on and so forth. So it's a really unique global network of people, and very outstanding, very, in my opinion, very interesting people with a lot of different backgrounds. So that's one thing. Another thing is that we are now creating some very interesting processes. For example, we have just established a group, a council, who are going to consult authorities and universities in establishing master program or other educational schemes in future studies and futures research, which I think also is very, very important to acknowledge both these activities as such related to research activities, but not only that, but also the authority or the funding bodies who are supposed to fund these kind of activities. They need some criteria to rely to if they should fund it, and I think that in the long term that could help creating also better funding structure for these kind of activities. So that's another thing, and we have these world conferences, and we have a lot of partners that are coming up now, and I mean it's great if you can just sit down and discuss within a known context with people in China and people in South Africa and in Arizona or wherever in the world. And if you're a member, you learn to know these people also. So I think that's a good achievement. That's a good platform, and we are not necessarily using the most modern technologies, also due to resources, of course. But you have a listserv, and we had also a journal like European Journal of Futures Research, but a lot of other members are engaged in other journals like Futures and International Journal of Future Studies. So they're also a lot of academic, scholar-oriented people within the federation, and you meet them there.
And that's part of the fun, hearing what they're working on. And
Absolutely.
yeah. So we have some more thoughts to share. So Kai from Potsdam, he's saying it's when you talk about the future, it's more about finding potential solutions to unthought problems than finding the future itself.
Exactly, Kai, as if I should have said it myself.
Yeah, so and Jane actually she has an interesting point. So the future studies could be considered an esoteric science, studying what does not exist yet, right? Or what cannot be known. So are we esoteric scientists?
I'm very, very well, I'm not sure if we should use the term esoteric science, because and that's the reason why what I was
by the way,
about
we're not opening goats' bellies and looking at the innards, okay? That's not what we're doing. We're mostly vegan, okay?
Okay.
Oh, how wonderful this, has been such a wonderful talk. And it seems we have a lot more to talk about. But we have to save some more for another day. So Dr. Øverland, thank you so much for your being here with me and the audience today. So I'm looking forward to working with you, the board, and the WFSF members to advance knowledge of the future.
Rom, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I wish you all the success you can get with coming programs.
Oh, this is gonna be fun. So just before we go here, Dr. Brighton, he would like to know more about this new area. It's a new multidisciplinary area, right? So actually, there's a lot of examples of future studies curriculums and in the website itself. So I will point you to the to wfsf.org. So Dr. Brighton will be more than happy to follow up with you as soon as we're done. And Dr. Sorbeck, thank you so much, and all of you guys for being here with me and Dr. Øverland. Today, I guess it's time for me to start to say my thank yous. And folks, thank you so very much for being here with me and Dr. Øverland. So this is just the first step. This is the first show. Please stay tuned. This show, In Focus, will be broadcasted via Futures Television, our home of the future on television, coming soon to Roku TV. It is going to be available freely via the Roku stick or on Roku-enabled TV sets. So please start looking for Futures Television and do add us to your list of preferred channels. Again, thank you so very much for joining us today, and I hope to see you again soon in another episode of In Focus. You can rest assured we have a lot of great guests ready to share their views with you. And I'm going to leave you with our institutional message.
Thank you, Roman. Thank you all.
Thank you.